Hello, this is James Brown, the Godfather of Soul. I feel good. You're checking out my man, Mike Siegel. Hit it, buddy, hit it, buddy, hit it, buddy.
And it's good to have you with us. Another big hour. And actually, it's going to be another big 2 hours. You're going to be mesmerized. This will be entertaining and compelling, but it is about very important issues, and I think everybody out there is going to be maybe stunned by the conversation we're about to have with a very important guest, and it's good to have you with us. Back over the years, I have been disturbed by some of these evangelical preachers that get on television and raise money for their own well-being. Pat Robertson being one of them. I met a woman who had worked inside his home doing some remodeling, talking about the gold faucets, the mansion that he lives in, the opulence, and of course all of that derived from the public supporting his lifestyle. And Pat Robertson is still doing his 700 Club. And then we had Jim Bakker and the PTL Club, and the scandal, and the fact that he took money from people for what was supposed to be a new life, and I think it was called the Heritage Club or something along those lines, where people would live at PTL in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we found out that he bilked people out of their money. He drove around in a Rolls Royce. He lived high on the hog. He lived, again, with great opulence. Paul Crouch, another tele-evangelical individual who went through scandals and questions and investigations. But the one who is the most insidious, the most dangerous, the most duplicitous and hypocritical is a guy by the name of Jimmy Swaggart. And back in about 1988, started his temporary downfall because he was found to be involved with prostitutes, and here he had been preaching and preaching and preaching the Word of God, living the good life, living the virtuous life, something that he talked about but never did himself. Came back at him again in 1991. Finally, the Assemblies of God Church kicked him out. We don't want you here, Mr. Swaggart. And then he got up off the mat, and I suppose to his credit, from a business point of view, you have to admire the business acumen, probably mostly his wife, Frances Swaggart, and they started to recreate their empire and did turn it around. And I know that there are some journalists who covered that story back then and Swaggart's downfall, but what we don't know, many of us, is that he's had a turnaround and maybe very quietly has created another empire, still taking money from people, the public, in my view, under false pretenses, allegedly to run a ministry, but actually to run his own opulent life with his wife. They ought to call her Queen Swaggart. Be that as it may, we are joined by a guest who worked for Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Michele Macumber, and has a great story to tell. Michele, first of all, thank you for doing this. I know it's probably somewhat painful, but I appreciate you being on the program.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Let's go to it then and start talking about it. How did you wind up becoming involved as an employee of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries?
Well, actually, they contacted me. I was on Francis and Friends radio program because of a church that is rather cult-like that I had been involved in, and I was doing a lot of writing. I had my own blog, and I was contacted to be on that radio program, and consequently, they flew me down, interviewed me, and offered me a job, which I took. I didn't know too much about the Swaggarts other than what had happened in the 80s, but it it was my understanding that he was repentant and that it was only a one-time thing, and so I felt, well, who am I to hold that against him? So I did take the job and moved down.
All right, so now you got that position. Tell us about your own religious beliefs, if you will, to the degree you want to talk about them, and what you believe in your own spiritual life.
Well, certainly I am a Christian, and probably not in the term that, or in the sense that North America views Christian, because basically I don't believe that most of our churches in North America really reflect, the true and the real gospel. But, I am a Christian, and I believe that it involves everything, heart, soul, and mind, and I believe that it's a heart and mind transformation.
Tell me what you mean by that. Does that, how do the churches in North America not live up to the standard you're describing? What do you see them doing that falls short of what you're describing?
Well, and we had discussed this just briefly off air a bit about that in even with Jimmy Swaggart, it's say this little prayer and everything's fine. You can go on living your life. You can go on business as usual, and that's just not the case. And a lot of the pastors in North America, it's a vocation for them. It's not a calling per se, but more of a vocation, and you've got these people that are giving to support lavish lifestyles of pastors, and that's just should not be so.
All right, so in other words, let me use one example. Dr. Martin Luther King, somebody I had great admiration for, when he was assassinated, he had a grand total of $30,000 of assets that he left to his wife, which was minuscule, not very much money, but Dr. King was zealously committed to the message he presented religiously and to righting the wrongs in society that he believed were wrongs. And he lived, in my view, a consistent life in that regard. Would that fit more with what you're describing? Somebody who sacrificed
Absolutely.
and gave in that way and didn't self-aggrandize about it?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've got it backwards, because most of the churches in America, the pastors expect to be served instead of serving the people and serving, the community. And it's most churches are doing nothing. They're doing nothing for their own people or for anyone else in need. And I believe that faith without works is dead, and that if you say you belong to God, you're going to do the works of one who belongs to God.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when you describe that about preachers, I could just put the word politician in there. You got the same result.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's really not much difference.
All right, so let's we have about a minute before breaking, so tell us a little bit about your initial impressions. You go to Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. When did you start working there?
I started working there in the very end of July in 2008.
And how long were you there?
For 3 years.
So you were there for 3 years, okay.
Yes.
And so you had a lot of time to watch and observe and participate.
Absolutely.
What was your initial sense, with about 1 minute before breaking, what was your initial sense about that ministry?
Well, initially when I came down to the ministry, they were on their best behavior because, I was interviewing for a job. But immediately after moving here, I wondered, what on earth have I become involved in? Because there was so much secrecy. And to me, if you have nothing to hide, then you hide nothing. But there was more secrecy than the corporations that I worked for, in the secular world.
So therefore, what you had with Jimmy Swaggart was a question: why is this so controlled and so tightly kept as a secret from the public and from the employees, for that matter? We'll come right back, Michele. Appreciate you being with us. Michele Macumber is here, and she's a former employee of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. We're going to expose Jimmy Swaggart for the fraud that he is. Mike Siegel here. Lots more coming, and we'll be right back. Stay with us. And welcome back in, folks. Mike Siegel here. Good to have you with us. We are joined by Michele Macumber. She is here as a former employee of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries and is here to tell us about what happens inside that organization that most would find stunning, incredible, amazing, and unacceptable. Michele, let's get to it. Describe for us the business plan of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, how they raise money through their television work and all of that sort of thing. The process of how they get their money would be the first place to start.
Well, a lot of their money fundraising is done on air, and I actually had a friend that did an analysis of hour by hour how many hours were spent fundraising as compared to how many hours were spent actually ministering the gospel. And the hours spent fundraising outweighed the hours spent ministering. So basically, he raises more money to buy more airtime so that he can raise more money. That's how I see it. Now, he also does send out, letters and so forth asking for funds, but most of his fundraising is done on air and on their radio show.
And they also sell products like DVDs and CDs and all of that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And they make a killing on these because the product or the profit margin is so huge on these things. They sell a Bible for $80 US, and it costs around $14 to $15 to make that Bible. So you can do the math.
The one thing about that point that's very important is that they will do, correct me if I'm wrong, but they'll do what's called a Bible-thon, and what they'll promote for hours at a time is the idea that people will donate money to buy a Bible for somebody who can't afford it, for a preacher, or for someone in need for a Bible, but they'll pay that full $80, as you said, and it costs Swaggart $14 to print it. So he's actually making $66, about 500% profit on selling the Bible, even though they present it on the air as being a gift of a Bible for somebody in need for a Bible. Isn't that a misrepresentation?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because he'll say, oh, we give Bibles to those people that are in need. No, they don't. What they do is they take donations from other people who are giving, $80 or however much and saying, okay, I want this money to go towards paying for a Bible for somebody that can't afford it. And that's, admirable. However, here's Swaggart saying, well, we're giving away all these Bibles. Well, no, they're not, because they match those requests for Bibles to the donors. And they never give away anything for free. Those Bibles are paid for. And not only that, instead of, paying, if somebody pays $80, that should buy several Bibles if you're considering them at cost. But no, that pays for one Bible. So, yeah, it's dishonest.
Yeah, in other words, that's right, because if you were to really do it from a benevolent point of view, Swaggart would say, donate $14 for a Bible or give us $70 for 5 Bibles, and they'll get to the people. And then, because in effect, he's pretending that it's a gift from you and from the Swaggart Ministries, when in fact it's fraud, because he's keeping a ton of money out of every Bible sale.
That's correct.
Let's go to some of their personal lifestyle. Would it be fair to say that the donations they receive from people, whether it's in the form of people buying CDs or DVDs, or donating for Bibles, or just direct fundraising, or just when Swaggart will be on stage and say, come up and bring us your tithing, that all of that money people believe is going to promulgate the ministry? Is that a fair point, that the people donating believe it's going to the ministry?
Well, yeah, I think so. I don't really think that anybody would give if they believed that the Swaggarts were living an opulent lifestyle, but they present themselves in such a way that they have given everything. And one of their favorite sayings is, give till it hurts. Well, why don't they give till it hurts?
Well, they don't even give when it doesn't hurt.
That's correct.
So now, the reason I bring that up is because I want to get to specifically how they use this money donated by people who believe they're promulgating the Jimmy Swaggart Ministry strictly for spreading the religious message that they can all believe in. Certainly we protect the First Amendment right to do that. But that's not what the money is used for. Let's start, first of all, about traveling. Donnie Swaggart, Jimmy Swaggart's son, apparently goes to various places to speak at churches and requires that he be put up at a 4-star hotel, 2 meals a day, and transportation, obviously flights back and forth. What about that?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so
correct.
They make no bones about that. Now, the more interesting is their vehicles. Now, Swaggart has a son, Donnie Swaggart, a grandson, Gabriel Swaggart. And what's interesting about this, as you pointed out to me, Frances Swaggart, the wife, who really runs things basically, has a white Lexus sedan. Jimmy Swaggart has a berry-colored RX 350 Lexus. Donnie Swaggart has a new CTS red Cadillac coupe. Gabriel Swaggart has and the young fellow, the grandson of Jimmy Swaggart, has a GX 460 Lexus SUV. And Jill, his wife, has a Jaguar for personal driving, as well as another SUV for driving around the ministry. Now, why do they need all these cars?
Well, and the only thing that I can say about, the Jag is that is something that was told to me. I have not personally seen the Jag, but it was told to me by a very reliable source that she does, or she at least did.
And the other cars you've seen around?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so why would, if the public knew that they were donating money to Jimmy Swaggart, so for himself, his wife, his son, and grandson's wife all get, $30, $40, $50, $60,000 cars, how long would these people be donating?
Not long.
And that money comes directly out of the ministry, correct?
Well, I don't know. I can't because obviously I wasn't an accountant there, but it would be my understanding, yes. Okay.
Then you talk about the fact that they dine out every day, most of the time anyway, and at the expense of the ministry. And apparently there's a very fine, fashionable restaurant in Baton Rouge where they reside, and the menu will show that the entree itself is about $50 a piece, but no problem. The Swaggarts take their family, go dine there, and use ministry money to do that, correct?
Yes.
What's your thought about that?
Well, it's not right. Now, when anybody brings these things up to them or, whatever, they always say, well, Jimmy will say, well, look, I've got all this music and, really I should be a multimillionaire. Well, he is a multimillionaire, first of all. And if someone is to be believed who is a reliable source, he's more than a millionaire. He's a billionaire.
Well, that's an interesting point. We'll come back on that point, so stay right there, Michele, and we'll continue along. We'll find out about, ladies and gentlemen, the alleged 2-bedroom cottage that Jimmy Swaggart lives in. 2-bedroom cottage? Let's find out when we come back. Mike Siegel here, Michele Macumber with us. Stay with us. Welcome back in, folks. Good to be here with all of you. Mike Siegel, as we get back to it. Michele McCumber is with us. She spent about 3 years working at the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Mr. Swaggart has come under a microscopic look here and did back in the 80s and 90s, continues to get that microscopic look, and seems not to have changed his lifestyle very much in terms of living opulently, if you will. We turn now, after talking about all of the very fancy automobiles, using money from the ministry that people give in order to promote the ministry, not for them to buy Lexus automobiles or Cadillacs or Jaguars, to his 2-bedroom cottage. Michele Macumber is here. As I said, she worked there. Michele, could you describe his 2-bedroom cottage?
Well, his cottage is 9,337 square feet. So that should tell you that it's not really a cottage. And it is a 2-bedroom, but man, that bedroom must be a whopping huge bedroom.
Have you seen the home?
I have not seen the home. I've seen it from the outside, but I have not been in their home. Very, very, very few people get to see in their home. But I have heard it described by others that have worked in it. You know, they have different people from the ministry doing jobs around their home. They have a maid, obviously, and people that do their yard work. So I have heard it described.
Now, the Globe says it's $30 million, this property. Does that sound right to you?
That sounds about right, because really he's on some of the most expensive real estate in the city, and he's got 20 landscaped acres, and it's not just his home on that compound. There's two other homes. There's his son, Donnie Swaggart's home, and there's another home that I believe Frances' brother used to live in until he was fired from the ministry.
She fired her own brother.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Frances Swaggart, of course, Jimmy Swaggart's wife. They have a grandson. Does he live on that estate as well?
No, I don't believe he does. And I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, he lives in Baton Rouge, but I'm not exactly sure where he lives or, you know, how opulent his lifestyle would be. Now,
on March 14th, 1988, the Los Angeles Times wrote this. His meaning Swaggart's, two-story high-columned parsonage, as it is called by ministry officials, sits behind a tall fence to assure privacy and is situated on 20 landscaped acres, including a swimming pool. The highly polished parquet living room floor is partly covered with an oriental carpet, and off the master bedroom is a step-up jacuzzi with faucets in the shape of golden swans. So that comes from the L.A. Times. And then the Globe on March 15th, a day later, says, Jimmy Swaggart and wife Frances, insiders say she calls the shots in their marriage and put herself in charge of damage control after the scandal broke. They should say she masterminded her husband's tearful, teethy confession of moral failure. And they talk there about the $30 million estate. They talk about the 9,337 square feet. Now, they say they have a wooden brick security fence that Jimmy Swaggart says was $250,000, but apparently it's similar to what lords and royalty use in England, and it's about actually $750,000 for that security fence. Is that right? I've heard that, yes. Reliable sources. And then Jerry Lee Lewis, a whole lot of shaking going on, Great Balls of Fire, and all the High School Confidential. In fact, I saw Jerry Lee Lewis at a concert. I don't want to date myself here, but I saw him years ago do a concert. He happens to be Jimmy Lee Swaggart's cousin. And the story goes that Jerry Lee Lewis asked his cousin Jimmy Lee Swaggart, "Why did you build such a home?" Jimmy Lee Swaggart says, "What Frances wants, Frances gets." And that, of course, Frances Swaggart, his wife. She apparently runs things. I said to you off the air, it sounds like, and tell me if this is a good analogy, it sounds like the way Bill and Hillary Clinton operate with each other. He does all the nasty stuff, and she has to protect the privacy of what he does, trying to bail him out. Does that sound similar? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good analogy. Very correct. She runs that ministry, and everything goes through her. It's not Jimmy's word; it's Frances' word that counts for anything. And she's very unreasonable. She's hard to get along with. She fires people at the drop of a hat. She's just. She's probably, and I hesitate to say this, but I've never actually said about someone that I literally felt evil in their presence, but she is one person that I would definitely say that is true. That she has evil in her. It feels like that. I've never actually sat before someone and literally felt palpable fear, but every time I was in front of Frances, even if it was a friendly conversation in her office, I did work with them quite in depth because I was the webmaster, so I dealt with Frances quite extensively during the first bit of my time there, and whenever I would be in her office and you know, that was quite frequently, I would feel fear, even if it was a friendly conversation. I have never experienced that in my entire life with anyone. I literally could feel it was a palpable fear. That's fascinating. Can you describe what you might fear? What would it be? Some sort of...
see, that's the thing, because I would be reasoning in my mind. I thought, okay, they think I'm doing a good job. I don't think I'm in fear of my job. I don't know. But I have heard this described over and over and over by other people.
So that's a common feeling about her, that she's...
Oh, the employees are terrified of her. I mean, literally terrified.
Why do people work there, do you think?
That's a good question. When I first got there, I noticed, first of all, I noticed the secrecy. But second of all, I noticed the way the employees behaved, and it was like they were browbeat. There was no joy there. In fact, they called the main administrative building, people would refer to it as the mausoleum, because you would go there and literally you would feel like every ounce of joy would be sucked out of your body. There was just an overwhelming sense of oppression or fear or something, and the employees were all afraid of Frances. And literally, I mean, even during the services, you'd be in the service and she'd be up at the front, and she'd sit there and sometimes be writing things down, and she would literally be looking at which one of her employees were in the service.
So, in other words, if you weren't there, you had a problem.
Yeah. I was. I stopped going to church there after not long, because I saw that it was a sham, and to me, I like, my soul was not for sale. In terms of, I wasn't going to exchange my soul for a job, and I just didn't want to go there and go through that sham, because that's what it was. And I stopped going, and I was castigated on more than one occasion regarding not going to church, and that was never made a condition of my employment there.
So she noticed that you wouldn't come to the service that they would run. How often when you were there, how often did they run services?
They have a service on Wednesday night, and then they have 2 services on Sunday.
So really, during the week, there's a lot of not much going on.
Not really. There's prayer on Tuesdays, during the lunch hour, which, is nothing much. I mean, they didn't really require people to go to that, but you were required to go to church. And, the odd thing is that the rules there seem to be selectively applied. And I think that that's what added to that sense of almost terror in the employees, because the rules kept changing, and there seemed to be 2 sets of rules. So you never really knew if you were okay, or not. And for example, she was upset that I was not coming to church. However, there were members of her own family not going to church that worked there.
And that was okay, but in your case it wasn't.
Right.
Let me ask you to stay right there. There's a lot more we have to get into, and we'll do that, and we'll do that during this hour and the next hour as well, because we're only getting started here, folks. Jimmy Swaggart has a whole bunch of stuff going on that would make you cringe. Stay with us. Welcome back in, folks. Mike Siegel here. As we continue the conversation, we're talking about Jimmy Swaggart, a flashpoint, if you will, for abuse of people who are in need, who are weak, who are looking for strength, and in return for a price, I guess he gives them a feeling of comfort. Michele Mccumber is here. She was an employee at Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for 3 years. And we're delighted to have her with us on the program. Michele, you were talking about Frances Swaggart pretty much running things. A newspaper piece pointed out, they say this: they predict that she'll pull out all the stops to preserve the Swaggart empire and the luxury that goes with it, like the his and hers Lincoln Town cars, the extensive wardrobe, the jewelry, the multi-million-dollar home, even the golf course retreat 15 miles outside Palm Springs, California, purchased by the ministry for $280,000 in 1986. So they used money donated to the ministry for Swaggart to buy a vacation home in Palm Springs.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the vacation home, it's interesting because whenever you or anyone confronts the Swaggarts over things like that, they'll always say, well, it was a gift. But it's interesting during the John Camp investigation that they claimed that the cars were gifts. But he actually proved that that was not the case. And so they lie. And so I think that they would probably say, oh, that was a gift. But you know, what they say and the reality of the situation is oft, if not always, not the same.
Yeah, well, actually, I remember of my own recollection, probably around '88, when all that story broke about his involvement with prostitutes. He was wearing a Rolex presidential watch, $20,000 watch, and he called it a gift from someone. His explanation was, oh, it was a gift. You could see it on his hand, and I saw it when he was doing his thing on stage, and it was actually what he described to be a gift. And I guess if you want to say that people donated money so that he could support himself in a manner to which he became accustomed, then I guess you could say that it was a gift from the donors to the ministry. But aren't a lot of those donors, at least in terms of your experience, what you saw, it would seem to me at least, they would be very weak in their self-image, going through problems in life, and they're trying to buy their way into maybe heaven or maybe the good graces of religion, in effect, through Jimmy Swaggart. Does that resonate with you at all?
Not really. That may be true for a portion, but that's certainly not the case. I know, one large donor in particular that has since come out against Jimmy Swaggart, and that was certainly not the case with this person. They had a very strong faith and really, loved the Lord, but they were suckered in. They believed the image that they saw and literally picked up and moved to this area to be closer to the ministry. And of course, once they saw the ministry up close, it was quite evident that what was projected was not reality, and they became disillusioned. But no, I don't believe that that's the case in every situation.
No, I didn't mean everyone, but maybe dominant.
Probably abortion, yes.
The only reason I bring it up is because he'll talk about people with alcohol problems, drug addiction problems, smoking problems. In other words, he tries to appeal to people who have certain kinds of problems that I guess he would consider to be sins, and therefore he's saving them, and therefore if you've got any of those problems, give me money and you're saved.
That may be in the thought processes of some. I don't know. Certainly not in anyone that I personally know, but, that could be so. I think, I know of one situation of a very wealthy widow, and I found this from one of the archives. I went through a lot of the archives and news magazines and so forth, once I left the ministry, because I really wanted to get a grasp on what I had just experienced. And I came across this article about and I think her name, if I'm not mistaken, was Zoe Vance, but she was very, very wealthy and actually ended up giving the ministry real estate and everything else. But, Swaggart literally would court people like that. And, here she was elderly, she was, getting close to her time to pass on, and I think that for someone like that, I think he courted her to make her feel that she needed to give this money to further the gospel and so forth. And I think it played on that, and I see that quite a bit.
Let me also just quickly go through some of the other specifics of the opulence of the Swaggarts. Frequent vacations, always out of town. They take their son Donnie, their grandson Gabe, and his family as well, multiple times during the year. They've got a membership in the Country Club of Louisiana, which costs $45,000 a year. And that's across the street from where they live, by the way. In the 1980s, Frances Swaggart bought a desk costing the ministry and the money that people donate over $11,000 for one desk. And then she redesigned their swimming pool at the donor's expense, had it redug and redesigned because she wanted a different shape. And then a few years ago, there were oak trees on their property, but she wanted palm trees. So they spent tens of thousands of dollars from the ministry, she and her husband, Jimmy Swaggart, to replace the oak trees and put these palm trees on the property. They like palm trees, so they had to do that. By the way, both of them have had many plastic surgeries. Is that correct? And I assume that's at the expense of the donors as well.
Yeah, they've had many plastic surgeries, especially Frances. But if you actually look at some of the pictures, and you can Google that, do an image Google search. There was actually an article back, I think that was in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe early 90s, that claimed that at that time Frances had already had 5 procedures done. And I know that during the time I was there, she had several procedures done. It's evident. And I don't have any problem with how somebody spends their personal money. That's not an issue. It's not the fact of the plastic surgery. It's the fact that, is this coming from donor money?
That's my point. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Somebody earns money on their own. If he writes a book and it's a New York Times bestseller, then God bless you. Go ahead and do what you want. But they're taking donations from people who think it's going to help the ministry, and it's actually doing facelifts for Frances Swaggart. Then you talk.
And I think that, people are giving this money thinking it's going to further the gospel, and they're listening to the Swaggart saying, "Oh, we've given everything, and we give till it hurts." No, they don't. They expect everyone else to give up their grocery money and whatever, but they certainly do not.
That's a very good point. They don't really. There's no benevolence in the Swaggarts. You talk about a pair of slacks Frances Swaggart bought costing $850, paid for by the ministry. Donnie, their son, buys a brand of sock that costs $30 a pair. I mean, I guess it's probably Henro from Switzerland, but that's a pair of socks costing $30 a pair. Again, all of this out of the ministry. Frances buys Louis Vuitton purses, gives them as gifts, and apparently Jimmy Swaggart's secretary got one of those, bought by Frances Swaggart, and she apparently wanted to make sure that the woman knew it was real, right?
Yeah, because that woman was me. And,
she gave you? Okay.
It was me, yes, and I commented on the handbag because it was a beautiful handbag, and she said, made sure that I knew that it was real, and I mean, it was pretty evident that it was real. But I found that very interesting, and it had been a gift from Frances.
Now, the other thing is, the ministry has many toll-free lines which are used only for purchasing DVDs or CDs, books, other materials, and for giving donations. But if you want a prayer, they only have 2 lines, and those are not toll-free. You have to pay for the call. Am I right?
Yeah, isn't that something? Here they are, claiming that they are so concerned about getting the gospel out and wanting to raise all this money for the gospel, and they're more than able to have the toll-free numbers if you're going to call in and you're going to give them a donation, or you're going to buy a Bible from them, or a CD, or a book. But if you need prayer, if you actually have a need for a prayer or want someone to pray with you, you're going to have to pay for that out of your own pocket.
And the final point in this segment is that they use the nonprofit equipment, meaning that they buy equipment for the church, but then they use it for the ministry, which is a profit-making organization, in order to sell their books and CDs and all of that. And they basically use it in a way they are not supposed to. Is that correct?
I would say that that's correct, yes.
Okay. Michele, if you can stay right there, we have a news break, and we'll come back and continue along with the conversation. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Okay, great. Michele Mccumber is here. Mike Siegel with you. We have another big hour telling the truth about one Mr. Jimmy Swaggart. Jimmy Lee Swaggart misrepresents himself. Stay with us.
Hello, this is James Bond, the Godfather of Soul. I feel good. You check it out, my man, Mike Siegel. Hit it, buddy. Hit it, buddy. Hit it, buddy.
Back we are, folks. Good to be with you for another big hour. And if you were here in the last hour, you should have been. We were joined and will continue to be joined by Michele Macumber. She is a former employee of the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Jimmy Swaggart back in 1988 and then in 1991 had 2 or 3 scandals break about his personal behavior with regard to prostitutes, with regard to doing things that were totally in violation of everything he was supposed to stand for as a preacher and a man of God, allegedly. And many would question that. But be that as it may, he had a downfall. The Assemblies of God Church kicked him out, and during the last several years, Michele Macumber worked at that ministry for 3 years, and Jimmy Swaggart is still at it, exploiting people, creating an empire, using religion to create that wealth and that empire. Now, I'm not going to question what's in his mind. I have no idea what he believes. He may believe devoutly in what he says, but he still manipulates people and uses people in order to be self-aggrandized with great money and wealth and power and all of that. And we're really appreciative Michele Macumber is wanting to talk about this. Michele, we talked about a good deal of the way they exploit for their own material well-being the ministry and the donations from people. That's the key. It's not as if they're making money in the secular world. They're asking people for donations. Fundamentally, all of the money they get comes from people either donating money or buying their products, correct?
Yes. Well, actually, no, because they do have quite a bit of real estate. In fact, the newspaper for Baton Rouge, their building, they actually rent their huge office space from Jimmy Swaggart. He also has an apartment building that used to be one of the former dorms. That he rents out. He's got numerous businesses that he rents to. So some of it comes from real estate.
But all of the money to buy the real estate came from well-meaning people who donated money to his ministry.
That's exactly right.
And this is my problem with it. He took religion, he took God, and converted all of that into a personal, hedonistic, self-serving, self-aggrandizing power play and monetary gain for himself personally, and not for the benefit of the message that he delivers. Yeah,
he built his own kingdom. And, he's literally got his own kingdom here in Baton Rouge. He's a very, very wealthy man.
Exactly. Do you have any concern about your own situation with regard to having gone on I know you wrote much of this, what we're talking about, already publicly on a blog. Did you get any repercussions from Swaggart or his wife, Frances?
Yes, I did, actually. They threatened to sue me, and I need to actually get that document on my website, scan it, and put it on my website. But they did send me, a threatening letter from their lawyer, and telling me to take the website down, or any mention of them off my website. And of course, I knew that everything that I had stated was the truth, and that it would stand up in any court of law. So I did not back down from that.
And what happened subsequently?
Well, it didn't go anywhere because they have no basis to sue me. I mean, they can't sue me for slander because I'm telling the truth.
Of course. But I mean, did the lawyer contact you again? Did the Swaggarts contact you again? Anything like that?
No, but it's interesting. I continue to receive really threatening emails from their supporters and so forth, and basically calling me everything, but the Antichrist. And I think some even probably did call me the Antichrist, but they very, very threatening.
Well, he claims that the Antichrist is Jewish. I saw him say it on television. So, and being Jewish myself, I didn't take kindly to that, to say the least. But I found the same thing, that, and you're very correct and courageous, because I've done this over the years in many campaigns that I've run, taking on large institutions, powerful people. And as long as you're telling the truth, and you're right, I happen to be an attorney, and the whole defense against the defamation lawsuit is truth. And truth, as they say, is an absolute defense against defamation. So they can't possibly...
Absolutely. And, if I have stated anything, it would be in error. It might be something that I've heard from someone else. But, to my knowledge, I would never state publicly something that I did not believe to be so, because, that would just be asking for a lawsuit.
Let's go to some of the treatment of employees that you articulate for us, and I've got your well-put-together treatise, really, of all of these issues. First of all, just briefly go through this: no health benefits, no unemployment benefits. So they don't really give much of anything. I'm assuming they also give no retirement benefits, correct?
I do believe that they do have a 401k, but they don't contribute money towards it. They set it up for you, but they don't contribute any. No, they don't do anything that's going to cost them any money. Employees really have very little. They have, what they make, and that's about it. And because they're a nonprofit, they don't have to pay into unemployment insurance. So now some states, I think there's like 2 states maybe that's not the case, but that, in Louisiana, they do not have to by law pay into unemployment insurance, so they don't. So really, if, these people are fired, they have nothing to fall back on.
The problem is that, as I think we discussed, the people are hired to work for the church, which is a nonprofit, 501c3, but
right.
The people do work for the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, which is a for-profit organization, correct?
That's my understanding, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, when you worked there, did you do work for the for-profit Jimmy Swaggart Ministries?
Absolutely.
But you were paid as a church employee, right?
That's correct, yes.
So therefore, they avoided any responsibility, but they... really, the IRS would say that they would want to pierce the corporate veil, because they're saying you work for the church when in fact you work for the profit-making organization, and that's fraud.
Yes.
And that's a fraudulent use of your services.
Well, and one of the problems that I had, one of the big problems that I had is that in terms of, what I described on my website about the printing, here they were, that print shop was, paid for by, it was nonprofit. The equipment was paid for through the church, and it was run by a nonprofit employee, but they were actually running it as a business and taking outside jobs, and they were calling that side of the business Starcom. Well, not only were they taking on outside jobs while using nonprofit employees and nonprofit equipment, but they were printing things that were in diametrically opposed to what he was preaching. They were printing covers for hip-hop bands and posters for area lesbian bar and other bars and things that were in direct opposition to what he was preaching. And some of these covers and so forth that were being printed there, and I do have pictures of some of that on my website. They were highly offensive. There was one that portrayed a human sacrifice.
Yeah, that's incredible. That he would condemn homosexuality and then use his print company to print lesbian materials.
Exactly.
I'm not here to condemn any group. I'm here to condemn him for being such an ultimate hypocrite.
Absolutely.
Saying one thing and doing another because he can make some money with it. We'll come right back with Michele Macumber. This is more and more fascinating as we go along. Jimmy Swaggart pretends to be virtuous. Welcome back, folks. Good to be here. Mike Siegel with you as we move right along, as they say. And we are joined by Michele Macumber. She is here as a former employee of the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Jimmy Swaggart, a preacher, evangelical preacher. One thing I will commend him about is his superb communication skills. As having been a professor of communication, I certainly look at his ability to hold an audience to be superb and stellar. Problem is, he holds them in ways and for means that I find to be less than moral, less than appropriate, deceptive, underhanded, manipulative, using people, belittling people. And that's an unfortunate part of what would have been a great talent. And I ask you about that. Michele Macumber is here. She worked for them. Michele, I'm just reflecting about that. It would have been nice, given the God-given talent that he had to communicate, that he had done it for the right reasons in the right way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Jimmy Swaggart is probably one of the best orators alive. He's mesmerizing, and you can tell, especially when you watch him in front of an audience, he holds people, he holds their rapt attention, and even people that are not perhaps prone to his brand of Christianity are still in awe of his ability and how he holds sway over an audience. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I, as I mentioned, I was a professor of communication and evaluated a whole lot of speeches for students, and I watch him in one sense to get the real point that he's making to do what we're doing here tonight and be prepared, and the other reason is that I watch the techniques that he uses. Let's talk about some of those. Let's talk about the tiers, especially and by the way, this is still available for anybody listening who wants to go online and just Google or use any search engine, Bing or Yahoo or whatever. Just put in there Jimmy Swaggart Crisis or something, 1988, and there's actually still on there the video of his apology at his church. And his wife was sitting right there, and he apologized to her, and apologized to the people. But it was very. Have you seen that particular apology, Michele?
Yes, I have, and it was very convincing. But it's interesting. I remember talking to John Camp, and his.
Now he's a journalist who did an expose of Swaggart, correct?
Yeah, he's actually the one that had broke the story originally, and he also did a program on when he used to be on CNN Impact. There's a program where he did an investigation back in the early 90s as well, and that actually is on YouTube. If you Google John Camp investigation, you should be able to bring that up on Google, because that's something to watch as well. But there was a cameraman that used to work for, I think, WBRZ in Baton Rouge, and he had said, and John Camp mentions this in his book, that this cameraman was amazed because he was interviewing Jimmy Swaggart, or he was filming him or whatever, and he was crying and just this flood of tears, and then I guess they ran out of film or something, and he said, well, hold on. And he was, this cameraman was, upset, like, I've missed this moment. Well, Jimmy shut those tears off in a second, and then when they had the film changed over, he said, okay, and immediately, right on cue, the tears came. And, I've had other people describe that to me, like people that have worked in the television department at Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. He's an actor.
Yeah, but he has his son. He has his son doing that too, and they both use the handkerchief where they pull it out and wipe their brow, that sort of thing, as if they're working hard.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My 4-year degree is in psychology, so these are things that I noticed immediately when I got there, and I felt that I was being manipulated by these things. It seemed evident, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it from the start, because I knew that it was theatrics.
Let's turn to Frances Swaggart for a moment. I would describe her as a tyrannical dictator. There was a woman who had
being kind.
I'm being kind. Very good. Well, and by the way, she's a public figure, and opinion is protected speech when it comes to public figures. So anything said about her in terms of characterizing her as less than positive is protected speech, as they say. And so that we can certainly describe honestly what we see of her. But apparently, a young lady I won't use her name unless you want to, was caught with a book in her car that Francis Swaggart did not approve of, and she had told them that she was not Christian when she was hired. Jimmy Swaggart said, well, we'll look the other way at that. And then Francis Swaggart, when she found that book in the car that she didn't like, told this young woman she was going to her house, she asked the woman to go to her house and bring all of her books back to the ministry so Francis Swaggart could trash the ones of which she did not approve. In other words, this woman had a private library, and Francis Swaggart was going to trash books that this woman owned that Francis Swaggart didn't like. I've never heard of an employer doing that.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately stories like that abound. And that particular woman was Treva Henderson, and that story was told to me personally by her. So, and Treva used to be a singer at the ministry, and actually was not there for long, but they continue to use her music and to profit from her. But, you know, stories like that abound of the control there, because literally when you work there, they own you. They literally own you. I think I told the story as well of back in the 80s, Francis making all of the employees weigh in. And, you know, it was one thing if you were, and then, you know, if you were overweight, you had to go on a diet and to keep your job. But that didn't apply to those in the inner circle. Stories like that abound. Complete and utter control. I know for myself, when I was fired, and I was fired because someone had sent me an email which outlined what was taking place in the printing department, and because I saw that email and because I now had that information, I was fired, along with 4 other people that knew about it. The ministry continues to say that when people ask about it, they say, oh, we fired those people responsible. No, they fired everyone that knew about it. The people that are responsible still have jobs there.
And that really is a very telling point. And this is the tyrannical kind of control. I made the point to you off the air, and I don't want to make comparisons improperly, but if you put aside anybody being physically harmed, just put that aside, it seems to me that the Jim Jones People's Temple was very similar to what happens at Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. No physical harm, but everything else is about the same. Is that right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, we'll come right back then, Michele, and stay right with us. We'll continue with some of this treatment of employees by the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries in a way that goes beyond anything any of us would imagine or tolerate or want to work for. And this is supposed to be a loving devotion to God. A ministry, is it not? Not that way with Jimmy Swaggart and Francis Swaggart. Stay with us. Welcome back in, folks. Good to be here. Mike Siegel with you, and we have with us Michele Macumber. She is a former employee of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Jimmy Swaggart, the manipulative preacher. Great communication skills, uses them in the wrong way to take control of people, to get into their pockets and get their money. That's what Jimmy Swaggart's about. Always asking people for money. Very interesting that people, I guess, Michele, one question that comes to mind is why, if you have any thought about this, why do people not see through that? I mean, he'll come on and just say, bring the tithing up, you know, you need to get this CD, you need to get this DVD, we'll do it at half price, send us the money. Why do you think people buy into that stuff? It seems so transparent to me.
And it does to me, but I think people want to believe that it's real, that it's right. He's speaking, you know, his message isn't all false. You know, he's got a lot of truth in there. It's just a very twisted form of Christianity, really, that makes people feel better sinning. I think people want to believe him. He's likable, and you know, like I don't dislike Jimmy Swaggart. He's almost impossible to dislike when you know him and you've met him in person. He's just a very, very likable man, and his communication skills are beyond anything I've ever seen.
Well, you could say that. I've met Bill Clinton, And you could say that about Clinton. Same thing. He's a very likable guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think I've ever met anyone that actually, doesn't like Jimmy Swaggart. Even people that have come up against him will say he's a likable guy. Now, Francis is another question. That's a whole other topic. I don't think I've ever met anyone that, had really good things to say about Frances. She's tyrannical, but Jimmy's another story.
So but he treated in your contact with Jimmy Swaggart, he treated you well. You felt good about your communication with him.
I'm sorry. I think my phone's breaking up a little bit. I didn't hear all that.
I was saying that it sounds as though that your interactions with Jimmy Swaggart, as opposed to his wife Frances, but with Jimmy, were positive interactions, positive communication. That you felt he was maybe a caring fellow and a nice guy, all that.
Yeah, actually, my first interactions with him and all my interactions with him were always positive. Yeah, I would say that, my impressions of him were very positive. From a interpersonal standpoint, I do remember being in one meeting where I saw a different side of Jimmy Swaggart, though, and I was a little bit horrified because I was fairly new there, and I was in a meeting, and they were talking about going into, it was either a country in Central America or South America. I don't remember particularly what country, but basically, he took his glasses off and, tossed them on the desk and said, "Oh, those people don't have any money." And I was horrified, and I think it probably registered on my face because Frances immediately corrected Jimmy and said, "Oh, well, but it's not about that." But I knew that was for my benefit.
In other words, to make it appear that he did care. So in other words, his whole point would be to go after people who have money. I mean, money is very... Is it fair to say that certainly with Frances as well as perhaps with Jimmy Swaggart, that money is the centerpiece of their motivation in using religion?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, here they are saying, we want to win the world, but they can't win the people in their own backyard. They have done nothing for the people in Baton Rouge. There's nothing. He doesn't do any missionary work or any sort of outreach at all. It's all his television program, and his television program is basically on air to raise more money. And yes, I do believe that he targets audiences that he believes will either donate to him or buy his Bibles. And I did hear him say, he said, "Oh, I could sell Bibles all day long," because people buy into that idea. And and it sounds like a worthy cause. Oh, I'm buying a Bible, and so I'm getting something, and I'm supporting the ministry, and I'm supporting the work of the Lord. So he goes through unbelievable amount of Bibles, and actually, I think his Expositor Study Bible is one of the top-rated or top-selling study Bibles.
The story that you tell about another employee who had was a guy who was a student at the Bible college. He did some work under the table, so to speak, for the Swaggarts, and then they thought he talked to a reporter and were outraged, Frances Swaggart and Jimmy Swaggart, so they fired the guy, apparently kicked him out of the church and the Bible college, and he was living at a place they owned, and they gave him 48 hours to leave there, and then threatened him with the deportation back to Canada using the immigration service to get him out of there. I suppose because they didn't want him talking about what he had learned. I mean, that's pretty oppressive.
Actually, this person contacted me, and I actually spent quite a long time on the phone with them, and they were still hurting. This happened a number of years ago, but they were still hurting over this incident a great deal, as are many people that have contacted me years and years after. But what the instance was, he did not do anything wrong according to the Swaggarts. However, he was good friends with someone they believed was in communication with John Camp. So because he was friends with this person, he was fired. and they kicked him out of the Bible college. And now that's something else I want to bring out. He has this, it's the former dorm, and he rents these out. Well, a lot of the employees live in the dorms. So when you lose your job at Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, more often than not, you'll come home and you'll have an eviction notice on your door. So not only have you lost your church, you've lost your job, you've been evicted. How are you able to find another apartment when you don't even have a job? So it leaves people in horrendous situations. But in this particular instance, this young man was going to the Bible college and was a Canadian citizen and was down here on a visa to go to school. And so when he was fired, he was given not just 48 hours to get out of the dorms, which is illegal, really. He should have been given at least 30 days because they're on 30-day month-to-month leases. But he was given 48 hours to get out of the country. He was told that because he was on a student visa, that immigration was requiring that he get out of the country within 48 hours. Now, fortunately, that was a lie, because he did contact immigration, and they said, no, you have, I think it was several months to leave the country. But he did have to vacate his premises there at the dorms, the apartments, and, where does he go? He has no money. He has nowhere to live. And these stories, I cannot even tell you how many people have told me similar situations. I know another another woman that had a single mother with a young teenage daughter, and she lost her job at the same time as I did over the same reason, because she also knew about the printing. She lived in their apartment, their building there. She came home from losing her job, and she has an eviction notice on her door. This is, that's business as usual for the Swaggarts. They don't care.
Yeah, that's this wonderful, loving Jimmy Swaggart who uses the Bible. I wonder if Jesus would have felt that way. See, the problem.
Well, another thing, Teresa told me another instance where a young lady had come to go to one of their camp meetings, and she was driving she had sacrificed to come, and she was driving a car that, was an old car.
Let me ask you to stay right there, if we can, Michele. We'll pick it up when we come back about this other young lady. This is an amazing series of examples, true stories about the despicable nature of Jimmy Swaggart and his wife Frances. Stay with us. Welcome back in. Good to have you with us, folks. Glad you're here as we share the evening with you, and we are really appreciative hearing an amazing story from Michele Macomber. And as I've said to Michele off the air, I think that at some point in her life, a book about the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries would be a contribution that would have enormous impact, because people need to realize that many of these evangelical preachers on television, Swaggart being at the top of the list, are deceptive, are manipulative, are self-serving, use religion for their own personal demonic purposes, and that need to be held accountable. And the answer would be that nobody's giving them any money. Simple as that. But that's why this information needs to be out there, and that's why we're doing this. Michele, you were talking about a young lady who was driving in a car, I gathered, that was not in such great shape to get to Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and this story was told to me again by Teresa Henderson, and that she experienced this firsthand. And anyway, this young lady had come to the camp meeting, and her car was not in good shape, and it broke down while she was there. She had no money to fix it, and she had a young child. Now, I believe it was a baby, but I'm not sure. I know it was a very, very young child. And Teresa, felt, her heart went out to her, and she went to Frances and asked if it would be possible for her to be able to have a room in the dorm to sleep for the night until she could figure out what she was going to do about her car. And Frances basically told her, well, not basically, she did tell her that, no, send her to the Salvation Army. This is a business. That's what she said.
Period. Now,
Period.
and I'm assuming she had perhaps empty rooms, did she not?
Always, yes.
And she, in spite of that, this woman was in need. I go back to the point. What about the people? We'll do this, and I'm hopeful you'll be able to come back maybe next Friday if you'd like to do that, because there's more to cover. But why do the people inside the ministry, who I would assume, if you know all this, they knew all this, why do the people working there in high-level positions, or even in modest positions, but especially high-level positions, if they're really believers in the work that they're doing as a ministry, why would they tolerate this and stay with Swaggart and not go someplace else?
Well, see, and that's what I don't understand, because near the end, I was looking for a job elsewhere, and actually, it's never pleasant to lose your job, and especially, once you lose your job, people look at you as if you've done something wrong, and in this case, there was nothing. As is usually the case with people that lose their job at the ministry. Usually it's over some perceived breach of loyalty. But I think people see the inconsistencies. I know they do. But people continue, and I don't really understand why. And I think a lot of people think, well, there's inconsistencies, but really Jimmy's a good guy. This is all Frances, or this is all the people, the upper people that are running things. This is all, but they think Jimmy doesn't know. And a lot of people hold out that hope. Well, Jimmy doesn't really know. If he knew what was going on, he'd make things right. But that's not the case, because I know, as is the case with the printing, I know that the guy in the print shop actually took this to Jimmy and showed him and said, look, I lost my job because of this stuff being printed, because he was under the impression that Jimmy didn't know about it. Well, Jimmy just brushed him off. So Jimmy knew about it, absolutely. And so I don't know. I can't answer that. But there is so many inconsistencies, even in the lives of the people that work there. The Bible college students, they're going out partying, they're smoking pot, they're drinking, they're, doing all these things that are completely diametrically opposed to what they're professing with their mouths. And I see that in the lives of some of the upper leadership there. There's numerous affairs going on. A case of a young man that's on the worship team there, who has bedded numerous women throughout the ministry, and in fact was only 15 years old and slept with a young woman from the ministry that was 27 years old, and these things are not addressed.
How are you aware of some of those things that you're now describing?
Well, some of those things that I'm now describing, everybody knows. It's common knowledge. And some of the fact of the partying, a lot of the young people that went to the Bible college, spoke to me about these things and were concerned. And you would think that this was just one or two people, but no, it was the majority. And in fact, I know one young man who went to the Bible college, and he lost his job because he had consumed alcohol. But the person that had given him the alcohol and at whose house he received the alcohol worked for the ministry and still had their job.
So the students at the Bible college, some of them would come to you and acknowledge that some of their colleagues, other students
Yes.
of the Bible college, would be smoking pot, going out partying, going out drinking, all of that.
Yes.
Did you know with any level of certainty that Jimmy or Frances Swaggart knew about that?
Yes, they knew about it, and I know that they knew about it because I know somebody personally that had gone to them and gone to Frances and talked to her about it. So yeah, they knew. And in the instance of the young man that I'm describing, he sat with Gabriel Swaggart and he said, "Look, if you're going to fire me, everybody that drinks alcohol, you're going to have to fire just about everybody under 30 that works for the ministry." And Gabriel said, "Yeah, he knew that. He knew that was going on." on. But it wasn't about them; it was about him. And basically, he was not fired for consuming alcohol. He was fired for another reason, but that happened to be the convenient reason that they found.
So
otherwise they would have fired the other employee who supplied him with the alcohol.
But officially, he was fired because of drinking alcohol. Unofficially, there may have been other reasons.
Right. Unofficially, actually, it was because, I better not say, but it was because of his association with people that had been previously fired.
So, in other words, that's an important point, though. So, in other words, they want to control people's lives to the degree that if you work for them, do not hang around with anybody who we fired previously.
Oh, no, yeah. You would be fired.
So you'd be fired for, in other words, on your private time. And the Constitution in the First Amendment gives us freedom of association, but I guess, of course, the amendments to the Constitution protect us from government, so they're not government. So I guess they could say that, but that's pretty tyrannical. I've not run across that sort of thing. Have you ever run across that anywhere else?
I had never run across that, and literally, I worked for corporate America, and I had never seen anything like this. They literally have control over their employees their entire lives, and you can be fired there for just being seen or having coffee with somebody that was previously fired, that they view as an enemy of the ministry, because they view that as being disloyal to them. So they will fire you. And literally, I have been out places, and people that were formerly my friends will run away from me. And I do mean run away from me. They do not want to be seen anywhere near the vicinity of where I am, because they're fearful for their jobs.
What a way to live. Are these people who could not get another job? Are they? Are the people who work there at the Swaggart Ministries, generally speaking, are they pretty intelligent, bright people, or are they just people who couldn't find another job someplace else?
The ones in the upper management, I would say that they're probably fairly intelligent, but no, in the general workers, no, they're uneducated, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're not intelligent, but some aren't, but some probably are, but they're uneducated. I think that would probably be a better description.
Well, you're obviously a bright person, you're very articulate, and you're also well-educated. So it would seem as though you wouldn't fit there. It doesn't seem like somebody with their own individual thought process could possibly survive there at the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries, because they'd be thinkers. And these people do not want thinkers. They want robots to follow them.
That's absolutely. That's a very good description. It's all about groupthink and being part of the hive mentality. And really what it's like is, they're all walking in step, and if you're a little bit out of step, everybody's going to turn and look at you and attack you, because you've got to come in line. And
the problem is that they're very seedy. Their own lives are replete with moral corruption, and then they want other people to follow the public view of who they are, but privately they're a very different pair of people, Jimmy and Francis Swaggart. Michele, I hope we can do this again maybe one night next week to finish up, if that's okay with you. Would that be possible?
Yes, absolutely.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your being upfront and courageous to be out there and talk about this, and we'll talk off the air and set up another conversation for next week, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Good to talk to you. Michele McCumber, formerly at the Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Stay away. Don't donate. Don't give them a nickel. They don't deserve it. Be good to yourself and the world will be good to you.